Lockdown. Lockdown. This is an emergency alert. That's the message that blared through the speakers that day. The day I nearly let a murderer inside my school. I wasn't even a full-time teacher at the time. I was just a substitute, covering for a math teacher at a high school outside of Austin, Texas. My usual assignments were random, bouncing between different subjects. But that day, I was filling in for a teacher named Maria, covering all her classes, including algebra and geometry. The day started off just like any other. I picked up the keys from the front office, walked down to the math hallway, and settled into my first classroom. I taught my second period class, then my third, and after that, I had a long break before my next scheduled class in the seventh period. Since I had no responsibilities for the next hour and a half, I decided to stay in the empty classroom where I had just finished teaching. I passed the time alternating between grading, browsing the internet, and checking emails on my laptop. At the start of sixth period, another class would be using the room, so I had to vacate. With nothing else to do, I decided to head to the teacher's lounge, located in the far back of the school near an exit door that could only be unlocked from the outside with a faculty ID. That's when I heard it, knocking. It was coming from the back exit, the one near the lounge. It was quiet at first, just a few light taps, but then it got louder, more impatient. I hesitated before going to check. The glass doors revealed a middle-aged man standing outside. He looked like a teacher, clean-cut, salt and pepper hair, a button-down tucked into khakis, and a black jacket over the top. He smiled at me. "Hey, can you let me in?" His voice was smooth, casual. "Are you a teacher here?" I asked. "Yeah," he nodded. "Mr. Abrams, I forgot my ID at home today." Something about his demeanor felt natural, almost reassuring, but a tiny voice in my head told me to be cautious. "Which subject do you teach?" I pressed. "Science," he answered quickly. "Look, I'm running late for a meeting, and I'd really appreciate it if you could just let me in." I hesitated for just a second more before pushing open the door. "Thanks," he muttered, stepping inside quickly. He didn't linger, didn't try to make small talk. Instead, he shoved his right hand into his pocket and walked with purpose down the hall, straight toward the math department. That's when the unease in my gut turned into something much worse. I rushed back to my laptop, heart pounding. Every teacher in the district had access to the school's staff directory, so I typed in Abrams. Nothing. No Mr. Abrams. No Abrams at all. A cold wave of dread washed over me. I had just let in a complete stranger, someone who had lied about working here. I grabbed my phone and called the front office. "I think I just let in an intruder," I whispered, my voice shaking. The response was immediate. Within seconds, the emergency alert rang out through the intercom. "Lockdown. Lockdown. This is an emergency alert." A chorus of slamming doors echoed down the hall. The lights in every classroom flicked off. Shadows stretched across the dimly lit corridors. Then I heard it. Screaming. A man's voice, raw and furious, shouting at the top of his lungs. "Maria, open the door! I know you're in there!" My blood turned to ice. Maria, the teacher I was subbing for. The one who had suddenly called in sick for the entire week. The shouting grew louder. Heavy bangs reverberated through the hallway as he slammed his fists, or maybe his feet, against one of the classroom doors. Boom, boom, boom. Students inside must have been holding their breath, terrified. I was paralyzed with fear. And then, the sirens. Police cars surrounded the school in minutes. Flashing red and blue lights illuminated the windows. I heard the thudding of boots as officers stormed inside, their voices barking orders. I couldn't see what happened next, but I knew the moment they caught him. The screaming stopped. The hallway fell silent. Later, I found out the truth. The man was Maria's ex-husband. He had been searching for her, tracking her down after she had suddenly gone into hiding. Rumors swirled about what had happened between them. Some said she had taken out a restraining order. Others claimed she had done something to make him snap. One thing was certain. He had come to the school with a gun, and I was the one who had let him in. I still wake up some nights, sweating, remembering the way he had smiled at me through the glass, the way he had thanked me as he walked past. If anything had gone differently that day, if the police hadn't arrived in time, I don't know what would have happened. I don't want to know. But I do know one thing. I'll never forget the sound of his voice, screaming Maria's name, just before the lockdown began. It started as a normal afternoon. It was fourth period, and I was in my sophomore history class, barely paying attention. The teacher was droning on about World War II, but my mind was elsewhere, thinking about lunch, thinking about the test I had coming up in chemistry, thinking about literally anything except the lesson. Then the intercom crackled to life. Lockdown. Lockdown. This is an emergency alert. At first, there was silence, a brief moment of eerie stillness as my classmates and I exchanged nervous glances. Then, chaos. Chairs screeched against the floor as students scrambled to hide. Our teacher, Mr. Carver, rushed to lock the door and switch off the lights. "Away from the windows," he whispered urgently, ushering us to the farthest corner of the room. My heart pounded as I crouched down, pressing my back against the cold wall. We'd had drills before, but this didn't feel like a drill. Something was wrong. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. The only sounds were shallow breaths and the occasional rustling of clothes. Then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing down the hall. A shadow passed across the small window of our classroom door. Someone was out there, and they weren't moving. The doorknob rattled. Someone was trying to get in. I felt a sharp pang of fear in my chest as my classmates shrank away from the door. "Mr. Reen," Carver held up a finger to his lips, his face pale. The rattling stopped, and then, bang, a loud, heavy thud against the door. Bang. The door shuddered in its frame. Bang. Whoever was out there was trying to force their way in. My breath caught in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, silently praying that the lock would hold. After what felt like forever, the banging stopped. The footsteps retreated down the hall. Silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I lost track of time. Then the sound of distant sirens filled the air. Relief flooded through me. The police were here. But just as I was about to breathe easy, I noticed something. Maya, the girl sitting next to me, was crying. She was shaking her head, her hands gripping her sleeves. "What is it?" I whispered. She hesitated before choking out the words, "Ellie's gone." I felt my stomach drop. Ellie, our classmate. She had been sitting right in front of me before the lockdown started. But now, she was gone. Panic surged through me. "What do you mean she's gone?" Maya pointed toward the back of the room, where a small janitor's closet stood slightly ajar. The door had been closed before. Now, it was open. And Ellie wasn't here. I didn't understand. Had she hidden inside? Had she left? Mr. Carver must have realized what was happening at the same time I did. He grabbed a flashlight from his desk and crept toward the closet. With one hand, he pushed the door open wider. The dim light barely illuminated the inside. And then, I saw it. A dark, gaping hole in the back wall of the closet. A maintenance tunnel. And it was open. The realization hit me like a freight train. Ellie hadn't just disappeared, she had been taken. Someone had been inside that closet, and they had taken her. I wanted to scream, but my voice was trapped in my throat. My classmates must have seen the look on my face, because the fear in the room doubled. The sirens were getting louder. The police were in the building now. Mr. Carver backed away from the closet, his face pale. He turned to us and whispered, "Stay here." Then, he slipped out of the room, heading toward the nearest officer. Minutes later, the school was swarming with police. They searched the maintenance tunnels, the basement, every room, but they never found Ellie. To this day, she's still missing. The only clue they ever found was a single shoe, Ellie's shoe, left behind in the tunnel. And the janitor? He disappeared the same day. The man in the vents. It started with the scratching. At first, I thought it was just rats. Our school was old, falling apart in some places. The walls had cracks, the ceiling tiles were stained, and sometimes you'd see a cockroach scuttling across the floor. So, when I heard something moving in the vents above my head during detention, I didn't think much of it. That was my first mistake. I was alone in room 203, serving an hour of detention for being late too many times. Mr. Lynch, our history teacher, was supposed to be supervising, but he had stepped out to take a call. The classroom was eerily silent, except for the occasional creak of the old wooden desks. That's when I heard it. Scratch. A faint, slow scraping noise coming from the air vent near the ceiling. I ignored it at first, tapping my pen against my notebook as I stared at the clock. Only 30 more minutes. Scratch. This time, it was louder. I looked up. The vent cover was old and rusted, the screws barely holding it in place. Scratch, scratch, it was coming from right above me. I squinted, trying to see through the narrow slats of the vent. The light in the room flickered slightly, casting shadows across the ceiling. And then, I saw it. A glint, a reflection of something shiny, a pair of eyes. I froze. Someone was inside the vent. I stared, my breath caught in my throat. The eyes didn't move. They were just watching me. Then, without warning, the vent cover shifted. The old screws groaned as if something heavy was pressing against them. I shot up from my chair, my heart hammering in my chest. The cover moved again. This time, it was clear. Someone was pushing it open from the inside. I backed away toward the door, my fingers fumbling for the handle. But just as I was about to yank it open, bang! The vent cover crashed to the floor, and something dropped down. A figure, tall, thin, and impossibly fast, landed in a crouch in the middle of the room. It wasn't a student, it wasn't a teacher. It was a man. His clothes were filthy, tattered, and covered in dust. His skin was pale, too pale, like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. But the worst part? His grin. His mouth stretched too wide, his teeth yellow and uneven, as if he hadn't stopped smiling in a very long time. I was frozen. He took a step toward me, his bare feet silent against the tile floor. Then another. I snapped out of my paralysis and yanked the door open, sprinting into the hallway. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, my footsteps echoing through the empty school. Behind me, I heard the soft patter of his feet against the floor. He was chasing me. I turned a corner, nearly slipping as I did. The main hallway was empty. I ran toward the front doors, only to find them locked. Panic surged through me. I turned around, expecting to see him right behind me. But he was gone. Silence, no footsteps, no movement. Just the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above me. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. And then, a whisper, so close to my ear it made my skin crawl. "Found you." I whipped around, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty. I didn't stop to think. I bolted toward the nearest exit. This one was unlocked. I burst outside, gasping for air, my hands shaking. By the time the police arrived, the school was empty. No sign of the man. No sign that he had ever been there. But the next morning, the janitor found something. A set of footprints, bare human footprints, leading from the air vents all the way to room 203. And scrawled onto my desk, written in what looked like rust or dried blood, was a single word. "Run."